I'm sure you recognize this unless you've been living under a rock, because you've never seen any movies about World War II or played any video games or at least seen some photos in a book. This is the unmistakable T-34 now. This isn't just any T-34, there were a lot of T-34s, different models. And certainly towards the end of the war with the 85 models, the T-34-85, they had reached the point where the tank was really excellent, definitely the best tank the Soviets could have at that time. There were others, but often with different roles. It was definitely the best medium tank, and above all, it was the medium tank that the Soviet Union needed at that time to win the war. But models like this one, which is not a T-34-85, maybe aren't as good as history or popular narrative suggests. He wanted to tell us about it. This one in particular is a T-34 model, 1943. We can recognize it by the hexagonal turret. The Germans used to nickname it Mickey Mouse because if we open the hatches on the turret, they're both circular, so it looks like Mickey Mouse. It's the last T-34 armed with the 36mm Minnow cannon, which was produced in 1943. Production will shift, and all Soviet factories will begin making the new T-34-85 SS. Not only do they have a bigger turret with a much larger cannon, but they also have several modifications to the hull. So I wanted to take this opportunity to tell you that the history and evolution of the T-34 isn't as nice as people often want to make it out to be. The early T-34s, the first models in particular, were meh. Basically, on Wikipedia you can read that the Germans suddenly encountered the T-34 and were frightened by its monstrosity. And they want to copy it. They basically copy it in the Panther. This is a huge misconception. First of all, the Panther was already in development well before the invasion of the Soviet Union. Secondly, the Germans. When they encounter it, and they encounter it right on day one of Operation Barbarossa, they are not particularly impressed. They are not particularly impressed because the original tank has a lot of problems. The T-34 as it was designed is my favorite example. To help you understand that something working well on paper doesn't always mean it works well in practice. And this is a fantastic tank on paper, but in reality, in practice, it's a terrible tank. In practice, it's terrible for a whole series of reasons. As with any technological design, whether it's weapons, cell phones, or cars, there are always compromises to be made. Let's start from the top. The turret is theoretically well armored with a powerful cannon, but inside it's terribly cramped, and it's cramped for a simple reason. First of all, the tank was originally designed to have a 45mm cannon. At the last moment, essentially, it was decided to install the 76, the famous Soviet 76, which takes up a lot of space inside. The turret has only 2 men. Most later tanks, including modern German and current models, typically have a 3-man turret. Except, of course, for the very modern tanks that use an automatic loading system. If you don't use that system, the turret needs 3 men. Why? A commander, a gunner, and a loader. The T-34 only had 2 men, the gunner and the commander, who also had to act as the loader. Apparently, there's nothing wrong with this tank. The Russians, even back then, even before the war, conducted a series of tests. First of all, they tested what the rate of fire of this tank was. They discovered that, under ideal conditions, with a stationary target at a known distance and the ammunition already prepared, it managed to fire 5 shots in 1 minute. In more realistic conditions, this number dropped to 2 shots per minute. You see, there are other very important things like visibility. Shooting at a target isn't just about aiming the cannon and simply pulling the trigger. You have to see the target, aim at the target, and find the correct distance. Load the cannon, fire the shot, see if that shot hit, and if necessary, make the right adjustments and fire another one. So you need to load it, fire, and watch where the shot lands. The aimer essentially only has optics that look forward. He's completely blind when it comes to spotting targets outside. The visibility for the commander isn't any better. The driver has slightly better visibility, but it's very limited. He still can only see forward within certain angles. The visibility of the machine gunner, who is in the front, also in the hull, is even worse. There was a case that is very significant where a T-34 took something like 23 hits from a German 37mm cannon. Some even celebrate this, saying it's tough, but yes, from the front, it probably is. The German 37 mm, though obsolete, was more effective against tanks than we might think. But what's surprising is that these took 23 hits before I answered. Do you know why? Because they couldn't see the target. Once they saw the target, they had to turn the turret, aim, and load the shell. Whenever the commander acted, the tank was effectively blind, unable to see and vulnerable to infantry attacks. In theory, as you can see, there are quite a few flaws. The Germans had already realized this before, but for example, the British as well understood that this was not the right way to do things. The commander acts, the commander commands the vehicle, often has to command his platoon of tanks, has to see what's happening around him, and must be able to communicate with other vehicles or, for example, with headquarters. The loader is responsible for loading the cannon, but not only that, he's also responsible for the internal organization of the ammunition, as well as the water and the gasoline. He is responsible for everything inside the tank. The gunner, on the other hand, not only has to be able to see ahead, but he also has to be able to see all around to help the commander spot targets if necessary. And the original T-34 is terrible. In this one, there are simply stories told by the Germans about how these tanks would basically stop in the middle of nowhere. And what if you didn't really understand what they were actually doing? The people inside were trying to figure out where they were, what they were doing, or who to attack. Now, these things, of course, would be fixed with the Model 85. The Model 85 has a 3-man turret, where the commander acts as the commander, the loader acts as the loader, and the gunner acts as the gunner. There isn't this problem. It's very important, and visibility has improved, but Russian tank visibility remains less than ideal. It will never be like that of the Germans or the Allies, but it's already a start. Another thing that's often mentioned by T-34 fanboys is its superior sloped armor. While the German tanks didn't use it and would only use it after seeing the T-34, the Germans aren't stupid. Sloped armor had been used for at least a century, mainly in naval applications. They weren't stupid for not sloping the armor. The sloping of the armor is actually not so much a protection issue as it is a matter of volume. On the back of the tank, you can clearly see what I'm talking about. Sloped armor takes away space inside. Imagine if the walls here were vertical, there would be much more space inside. Which means you can have more ammunition, you can have more fuel, or even just a bit more elbow room for the crew. That's significant because, as I mentioned in my previous video, ergonomics is extremely important. Actually, what's the point of having sloped armor on the back? If someone is shooting at you from behind, you likely have bigger problems. If the armor were vertical, maybe there would be more space for engines, for radiators, for transmissions and things like that. Here, the Germans weren't stupid. Their design, which was a bit boxy, was simply a matter of space. According to them, according to their engineers, their military thinking was at play. It wasn't worth it. It wasn't worth having sloped armor at the expense of internal space. German tanks are very ergonomic, comfortable, and spacious inside. It wasn't until the war that their thinking changed slightly, only sloping the frontal armor. In fact, the successor to this tank, the T-44, will have only the frontal armor sloped, while the side armor will be perfectly vertical, to maximize the internal volume as much as possible. Almost all modern tanks, really all of them. But even going back, like the American M4 Sherman and later developments and the Cold War, they all have sloped frontal armor but straight side armor because it's a matter of volume, of ergonomics. Being able to carry 10 extra shells or 100 more liters of gasoline into battle can make a big difference. The T-34 models that were captured by the Germans during the early stages of Operation Barbarossa were examined, and the Germans were not particularly impressed. The tank, at least initially, had a lot of problems, many of them with the transmission. There are some photos, I'll try to show you here, of a T-34 tank going into battle carrying a spare transmission on the back of the hull. This transmission had other problems, such as it being extremely difficult to change gears. The T-34s, believe it or not, came from the factory with a hammer for the driver, a hammer that was used to engage first gear or reverse. Because without it, you just couldn't do it. There are other things that are very important for the overall size. The tank uses these little things. Torsion bar suspensions, everyone, especially in video games, acts like they're so cool. Torsion bar suspensions take up at least 20 centimeters of space inside because they're internal. Changing them is terrible, managing them is terrible, and again, they take up space. It's no coincidence that all later tanks designed by the Russians and others worldwide, they will use the so-called torsion bars. Their great advantage is that they are essentially stretched out under the floor of the tank and therefore take up very little space, even before the war. The Russians themselves, before 1941, had designed and built a prototype called the T-34M, which used torsion bar suspension precisely to save space inside. When the war broke out, the model wasn't ready, so they decided to put it into production anyway, despite all the problems it had. The Russians knew it, the Germans knew it, later on it would definitely become a good tank. But that this was a super weapon that the Germans didn't know about, that they suddenly encountered it and got scared. It's a pure myth. Unfortunately, I can't get inside it nor climb on top of it. Also, you can't see it either. But in the distance, there's a gentleman from the museum who's watching me. To give you an idea of how miserable the crew inside was, this is the gunner's position. Here is where a machine gun would go. The gunner could see the outside world from this small hole. Notice something else. He has no way out. He has to get out after the driver. And I assure you, when they're shooting at you, crew survival is one of the most important aspects of tanks, even modern ones of that era. For example, the Israeli Merkava is designed in such a way as to offer the maximum possible crew survival. Because you can buy a tank, but an experienced crew is hard to buy. And there are actually many cases of tanks being destroyed with the crew surviving. In fact, most of the time, when a tank is damaged in battle, abandoned, or even destroyed, the crew actually survives because the crew isn't just waiting around to be slaughtered. It often takes more than one shot to destroy a tank. And when it's immobilized, or the cannon no longer works, or in any case it ends up surrounded, the crew makes a run for it because they're not stupid. And I know that in this case, as I said, that the position is really miserable. There's nowhere for it to go. And if the driver dies and he's still alive and the armored vehicle is burning, how does he get out? It's kind of a tomb. Let's wait for the gentlemen to take their photos, but I think they like appearing in a Vlad Sparastoria video. At this point, I don't care anymore if there are other people. The shot is what you see, the best angle I found to be able to see a bit from above what's happening without climbing onto the tank. Because again, there's the guy watching me, it's pretty much forbidden. In Poland, they don't easily accept such transgressions. You see up there on the roof, I hope you can see it well, there's not much inside the tank, there's a sort of dome, but that's actually a dome for ventilation. Actually, the commander would have a small periscope, but in reality, the device itself is missing. There's only the mount left, which is his only way to see outside. As I mentioned earlier, visibility in this tank is terrible. He can also see to the side through this thin slit, which is probably about a centimeter wide. Try to see anything outside through that. And I assure you, if I get the chance, I would like to get inside one. To film it. I've already been inside and I assure you it's terrible, but if I filmed it, I'm not sure if it would really capture what it's like. I'm a guy who's 6'3" and I assure you it's not good. It's not good at all. This short presentation is over. I hope you enjoyed it as I climb up to reach the camera. As always, subscribe, like, share this video if you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.